Hi there, and welcome to the Main Idea podcast. I am Jen David Lang, and my passion is helping school leaders learn. I read lots of education and leadership books, and I save you time by only sharing the most compelling and impactful books with you. Recently in the Main Idea, I shared 4 books that I suggested for summer reading for teachers. I actually, after that email, had some people write back and say, what about books for leaders? And I said, well, I do that all the time. So this was a special edition with 4 books for teachers that if you're a leader, you could let the teachers choose, and you can buy them for your teachers and have them read over the summer. But honestly, leaders should be reading books about pedagogy, content, managing student behavior. So it could be for you too. Anyway, one of the 4 books that I recommended for teachers to read this summer is The Illustrated Guide to Visible Learning, An Introduction to What Works Best in Schools by John Hattie, Doug Fisher, who is with us here today, Nancy Frey, and John Almarode. I've long admired John Hattie's work because, as most of you know, he's the guru of what research shows about what works in schools. And I've long been a fan of Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey's work because in their books and in their work, they do this amazing job of taking concepts in the field of education and making these concepts very clear for the rest of us. That's what I hope to do in my work. They just do it better. So basically, they translate a lot of powerful education research and education ideas into the concrete knowledge we need in schools. And so that's what this book is. It's a perfect marriage of research and practice. So as a quick recap, John Hattie conducted the biggest ever research project on what works in schools. He synthesized over 100,000 studies. He performed meta-analyses, which involved over 400 million students, and it's changing. There's probably more. My statistic is probably old, to figure out what most impacts our students in school. And what he did was he examined the effect sizes of different practices like cooperative learning or RTI, to see how much those practices impacted students. And an effect size of 0.40 is the average we expect a student to learn in a year. So we're looking for practices that have a larger than 0.40 effect size. That's very watered down. But for example, a practice that had a 0.80 effect size would mean those students would learn twice as much in a year as we would expect them to. Very, very watered down. Doug will help me flesh it out, I'm sure. Doug, Nancy, John Almarode, together with the talented illustrator Terrell Hansen, put together an illustrated book, yes, with drawings and diagrams and all the things that adults think aren't for them, but help us so much, to help create a more visual representation of strategies and practices that work in schools. And this book goes even further than that. It doesn't just share a laundry list or a David Letterman top 10 list of strategies that have the highest effect sizes. You'll see the brilliant way they organize this book in a moment. But let me just introduce you to Doug. If you've been listening to my podcast, you don't need an introduction to his work, or if you're not, he's everywhere. But Doug Fisher is a professor and chair of ed leadership at San Diego State University and a teacher leader at Health Sciences High and Middle College. Previously, Doug was an early intervention teacher and elementary school educator. He has published so many articles on reading and literacy, differentiated instruction, curriculum, design, and much, much more. I doubt he even knows the number. I don't think I know any other author as prolific as Doug.
Wow.
If you've ever heard him deliver workshops or presentations, you know exactly what I mean by how good he is at breaking down concepts in a very clear step-by-step manner for all the rest of us. And you'll absolutely hear in his voice both a passion and an urgency for this work. So with all that, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show, Doug.
I so appreciate that. How kind of you. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. So you heard my very brief introduction of Hattie's work. What made you first interested in Hattie's work, and what do you believe to be the power of his work? And certainly correct any errors.
Yeah. I think that assembling all of this in one place and helping us collectively think about what best accelerates learning. Is this a high leverage approach that takes a lot of time and effort, or is high leverage approach that takes less effort, so we should do it right away? There are things that are below the hinge of 0.40 that still are useful, but how much attention do we want to pay to those kinds of things? So it's a really interesting way of organizing the way education has evolved, educational research has evolved over decades. And I think it's a really interesting way to say, if I have time limited and I have priorities, where should I leverage? What should I do? Which things should I pull and push to get a change in achievement? And so I think that was our original interest. And way back, we were talking with some folks at Corwin and said, a lot of the effect sizes in the original book related to literacy, because there's a huge body of literacy research, and it's one of the oldest bodies of education research. Reading comprehension research has been around a really long time. And so we made this comment to an editor, given how many influences are specific to literacy, it seems reasonable to do a literacy visible learning. And the editor, her name is Lisa, she's like, that's a great idea. John's going to be in town. Do you want to meet and talk about your idea? So we did. And that has generated a whole bunch of books and articles, and our ability to say, if that's the effect of vocabulary, what does it actually look like in a classroom? Because there are bad examples of vocabulary instruction and good examples of vocabulary instruction. So Nancy and I started taking this on and saying, okay, if that's what the meta-analysis says, if we read these studies, what are the essential features of something like vocabulary? Well, that started expanding into other work like scaffolding and feedback and the different effects that were out there that were kind of unexplained or too generic, that we didn't really have a strong sense. I mean, there are thousands of studies on scaffolding. Scaffolding has a good effect on learning, but what do we mean by that? Do we over scaffold? Do we under scaffold? So we wanted to, we get interested in something and kind of dig down into it and say, okay, how do we make that work? And as you noted, I work at a school, currently a high school, been here since 2007. And so we try things out before we write about them. We were one of the original early US certified visible learning schools. We took on the data, took on the evidence into action cycles. It became a habit of how the school works.
No, I think that is what makes your work so powerful. It is that you can write very clearly, but also that you are trying things out. So you're not some, researcher up in some ivory tower. And you make an excellent point, right? So if scaffolding is one of the practices that has a high effect size, what does that mean, right? If we don't have much more to go and you're using scaffolding in your class and I'm using it in mine, the chances are we're doing something markedly different.
That's right.
And so, so yes, I do want to I'll jump into that and then I'll go back. But yeah, so in the book, before you get into the practices, you start with two very important sections. And one of them is connected to what you just brought up. So you have a section on big ideas. You have four big ideas, and those are so big, we could spend the whole podcast talking about them. I'm going to focus on one of your big ideas. Well, John Hattie's, I guess, right, is know thy impact. And to me, this seems to me to be the key to everything. So can you explain what know thy impact means, and also connect it, the title of your book and all the other ones is visible learning. I don't know if people know exactly what that means. Yeah.
Sure. So that was kind of John's big idea. He had one big idea originally, this is the most important thing. Are you having an impact? Is what you're doing making a difference? Yeah. And we all want to have an impact. When we feel an impact, we recognize an impact, we are way more likely to allocate more of our resources, time and effort to maintain and grow that impact. So it's really an important area. But know thy impact is also a nuanced thing. Are you having a sufficient impact? Are you having an outsized impact? Are you having a minimal impact? Because most of what we do in education works. There's very few things that don't work. It's how well they work. How much do they actually accelerate learning, I think, is the important thing. So when he says know thy impact, there's a subtext of, did you get a whole year of learning for a year of school? Did you get a year and a half of learning for a year of school? Or in a lot of communities that I'm working in, you get a half a year of learning. The average ninth grader reads at the 4 or 4.5 grade level. So a half a year of learning. So that impact and being able to attribute learning outcomes, achievement to our efforts. Because sometimes we take credit for students' learning that actually occurred other places because we have no evidence what they knew and didn't know before we collected assessment information.
Yeah.
So I think that's all and then a lot of your listeners are educational leaders. What's the impact you have? The whole point of going into ed leadership is to magnify the impact that you have. Not 30 kids a year or 100 kids a year, but 1,000 kids a year or 600 kids a year or 4,000 kids a year. So what's the impact that you're having as a leader? What's the impact that teachers have as teachers?
No, and I really appreciate that because, John Hattie is the researcher. He could have just said, look, this is what the research shows. But like we said with scaffolding, how you're implementing it and how I'm implementing it are going to be different. Our student populations are different. Our school culture is different. So we each need to see, is the way that we are implementing this impacting the students? And if so, how much?
Yes.
And, John Hattie has a whole book about this, and he gives an example of two teachers where the first teacher says, I want to teach a good lesson, while the second teacher has a different goal. That teacher says, I want to examine the impact of my teaching on the learners.
Yep.
And so I have to make their learning visible to do that. So the first teacher is just going by gut feeling. Oh, I felt that was a good lesson, right? I did a good lesson. There weren't too many interruptions. But the second one is looking for evidence. And the evidence of the student learning is why we have to make learning visible, because otherwise it's happening in kids' heads. So that's this whole visible learning idea. You have to first make the evidence of your teaching visible. Nothing doesn't have to be anything too crazy, right? We're talking about, assessments and writing and projects, right? That makes the learning visible. And in fact, because yes, you pointed out my audience is leaders, Hattie believes so strongly in focusing on the impacts of teaching. He argues against observing teachers and says instead, I never allow teachers or school leaders to observe the teachers. I only allow them to observe the students, right? So it's a little extreme, but it gives you an idea.
And John will say often, sorry, Jen, John will say, I don't care how you teach. And I do care how you teach, but because I have I'm a little bit more instructionally focused. And I get why he says that though, because he wants to know, did they actually learn it from what you say? So I get it, a little, controversial to like people like, what do you mean you don't care how I teach? What I think also in that respect is there's lots of right ways to do this job, but there are also wrong ways. So if you're doing round robin reading and you call that teaching, I'm gonna call you out on that because there's not evidence that's gonna foster students' learning. However, with the tools you use, if you did Jigsaw and you did reciprocal teaching, I'm not gonna tell you which one to use. I don't care which one you use. Did the students have a productive conversation that resulted in them learning more?
I get the sense when John says that, and you know him personally, I don't, that he's just trying to egg us on to because we all think I go to classes and I observe teachers. So I always take it that way, that he means it that way. But yes, obviously.
And I think there's a provoking to that, right? So are we, but the deeper issue there is when we visit classrooms as leaders, are we only watching teaching or are we watching teaching and learning and the learning that results from the actions of that teacher? And are we helping teachers see the relationship between their actions and the impact those actions have?
Yes. So to bring it back to your book, the idea with Know Thy Impact is whatever you and I talk about or whatever they read about when they read your book, people should keep in mind that this is just in the abstract. And until it's actually being taught and we're looking at what students are learning, it doesn't mean X is always better than Y when it comes to practices. So I appreciated that in the intro, you have these 4 big ideas. And then in another introductory section, you talk about mind frames, or I think in the US, we often call them more mindsets. Can you talk to us about why mind frames are so important when we're thinking about teaching and learning?
Yeah, and John's done a lot of work on this, and I think there's some really interesting things. He said to me years ago, I really care about how teachers think about their teaching more than their teaching. And I'm like, I don't understand it. And it took me a long time. And I started doing more, I do academic coaching, I support teachers' growth. And I was having a conversation with a teacher and the lesson wasn't great. And she knew it, I knew it, the lesson wasn't great. And we had this really interesting conversation. And what I understood is the way she thinks about teaching and learning is influencing the actions in the classroom. So I could get her to comply, you must change this, you have to do this. But if it didn't change her way of thinking, it would likely revert back when I'm not there, or when I leave, or when she's not being observed. And what we're trying to help people think through is, why are you making the decisions you're making? What's the thinking that underlies that? And what kinds of thinking are most facilitative of your professional life?
Yep.
So teachers' mindsets, their mind frames, guide the decisions they make. They guide the kind of evidence they collect from students. They guide the conversations they have with their colleagues in collaborative learning communities. All of that influences what we pay attention to and the decisions and actions we make. So I think that's why these mind frames become super, super important, because helping someone mediate or explore and expand their mind frames helps them think about why they're doing what they're doing.
Yes. Well, and in fact, it doesn't just help them, but I would argue everything a teacher does is based on what that teacher believes, maybe other than breathing, the automatic
Right.
functions, right? And so that might seem overwhelming for leaders. Well, how am I supposed to impact teacher thinking? They're actually, a lot of what you model, what you do, what you say, the structures you put into
Yep.
place,
Yep.
you are impacting teacher thinking. And if you don't think it's important, just like you just said, Doug, you can tell the teacher to put kids into cooperative groups. And when you walk in the door, they'll do that, but
Yep.
it's not going to stick. It's not
No.
going to stick. And, you said you do academic coaching. Elena Aguilar writes about, we need to do more than coach behaviors. We have to
That's right.
coach beliefs and ways
That's
of being, and the beliefs are another way of thinking of mindsets or mind frames.
Exactly.
So that's another thing. Again, as you're listening to us talk about these practices, we're going to get into, it's not a matter of just, mandating these by fiat,
Sure.
or, it's revamping and influencing teacher thinking as well.
That's right.
So before we get into the specific ones, I have to say that I was really impressed that you didn't just choose to write a book with the top 10 effect sizes and here are the top 10 practices to illustrate them, right? And include nice pictures. Um, Actually, I'm lying a little. I wasn't really impressed. I was disappointed because I was hoping for like a simple list of top practices to keep things simple. I read some funny quote recently about how humans are the only species that loves lists, or I don't know, but educators love lists. So why didn't you just make a list for us of the top practices that teachers should be using?
A couple of reasons. Then, if you take a top 10 approach, it implies that the next 10 are not important, and that those 10 are the only thing that we need to be thinking about. Teachers make thousands of decisions a year, or a day. Teachers have to think through why they're doing what they're doing. What's the right next move that accelerates learning for students? So a top 10 approach might cut that out. And in addition, the influences fit together. So you gave an example of cooperative learning. There are lots of influences that relate to cooperative learning. There's an influence of cooperative learning studied specifically, but there are other things about getting students to talk and dialogue and interact with peers that are a cluster of things together that we didn't want to take a top 10 approach because, by the way, the list changes all the time. Because one of the great things about John Hattie is every time a new meta-analysis comes out, he's adjusting the effect sizes in real time.
And you can go on his website, which is live, and look today, tomorrow, the next week, if you want.
And if there's new meta-analysis come out, he will adjust the number.
Yeah.
And he says all the time, I am looking for evidence that I'm wrong.
Yep.
And in the newest work, he includes a robustness scale of 1 to 5 about how confident. So if you see the thermometer with the effect size, there's an R equals. That's how confident he is that the number won't or will change in the future. So an R5 is, there are lots of studies. We're pretty concerned. The range is very small. We're pretty sure that number is going to stick where it is. If we're talking R1, there's probably one meta-analysis. There are probably limited numbers of studies. It is highly likely that will change when new research comes out. And so he's trying to convey this is not a permanent effect size. It's being informed by research that is being conducted now. So that's why another reason why top 10 won't work, because it could change in 2 months. It could change in 3 months, 6 months. Instead, we wanted to say, what would be some signature practices that would suggest you're engaged with the visible learning research database?
Yeah.
Now, we chose 11 of them. There are way more that we could have chosen, but like, here's some key ideas that we can defend from this knowledge base.
Yeah. And I'm playing with you. I'm playing devil's advocate. A top 10 list, I don't think it would work, because when I look at from the top down, they're all over the place. Number one might have nothing to do with number two. So if I think back to my teaching days, if I were teaching,
Right.
I don't even know how I would organize all of
Right.
that.
Right.
So that's why I appreciate you had these clusters of related practices that have different effect sizes. And these clusters are like classroom climate or feedback or teacher clarity. And that's how you organize the book into 11 of these clusters.
Yeah.
But you call them signature practices, not signature clusters. I
Right.
guess that's a weird phrase. So yes, I thought we would just focus on 3 of them, and then people can read the book for the rest.
Okay.
I thought we'd focus on signature practice or cluster 1, classroom and school climate, signature practice 4, teaching students to drive their own learning, and signature practice 8, the power of the collective.
Awesome.
And so signature practice 1, classroom and school climate, I choose that. It's the first one in the book, but also in the US right now, schools are ending and people are thinking about the new year, or some of them are, and how to start on the right foot. So it looks like there are several evidence-based or research-based influences in this general area, like connected to classroom climate, parent expectations, 0.50, teacher expectations of students, 0.90, right? Again, that students in classes with teachers who have high expectations can learn twice as much as with teachers who don't. And then the crazy one, student expectations, I'm assuming that student expectations for themselves is 1.23. So they would learn 3 times as much as students who don't have very high expectations of themselves. So these 3 are wonderful, but how do we get there as educators, as teachers, leaders? How do we improve teacher expectations and student expectations?
Beautiful. So when we go back, so in the original visible learning, the climate wasn't the major thing. Like it was there, but over time, and we've really learned a lot about this, climate first. How that feels to a learner is super important to their eventual learning. Is it safe? Do I have a sense of belonging? Do people expect things of me in terms of my learning?
Yeah.
You end up with things on stereotype threat. You end up with things about bias. I mean, there's just so much that goes into climate and culture. The ones you chose around expectations, these teachers' expectations become students' realities.
Yeah.
If I don't expect you to learn, I'm really good at making sure you don't. Now, it's probably a subconscious and unconscious behavior. We don't mostly say that kid's never going to learn, but it's just how we act and interact with them. And it's an important thing to think about. And we have indicators that teachers hold high expectations. For example, in classrooms where there are high expectations, students talk more about learning. They talk to each other. They talk to their teacher about learning. In classrooms with low expectations, they don't. They're mostly quiet and work alone. And there's just, I mean, we can look at the indicators, like when you walk in as a coach or as a leader, you can judge, you can assess the level of expectation that occurs. It's not just, did I put hard tasks in front of students? There's a lot more to this. Who gets called on? Who gets recognized? All of that related to expectations. In terms of students and their expectations for themselves, I think that has to do with their history of success and failure and the ratio. If we ensure that students regularly experience success, they come to expect success. And they see mistakes and failure as temporary and transient, and that they know that they have teachers who can support them through those mistakes and failures. If their success-failure ratio tips to failure, they start to say, I'm a failure. I'm not a math person. I'm not good at math. I don't do math. I'm not a writer, whatever. And they look for confirming evidence that they are a failure in at least that subject area. And so they are very, very accurate, given their success-failure ratios, at predicting their future success in your class. And so if we can interrupt that and increase the frequency of success, probably chunking lessons into you had 5 opportunities for success in this hour.
Yep.
Yeah, 3 out of 5 is greater than 1 out of 5 or 0 out of 5. So, so we can manipulate this. We can guide this. We can make it safe that when you do make a mistake, nobody teases you and bullies you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if we ignore that, it reduces your likelihood that you're going to take that risk in the future. And you're going to start to say, I don't learn this stuff. I don't learn from you.
And your examples make a good point that it's not just, oh, I hope as a leader that I have teachers with high expectations, or as a teacher, oh, I hope that my students have high expectations, or I hope it's not a strategy. But what you're describing are actual structures and actions. And you have, more in the book about what teachers who have high expectations, what do, right? Like they ask more open-ended questions. They manage behavior in a positive way, not in a punitive way, right? They assess what students know. So you're not teaching, what they already know. So there are actual practices that help. Again, we're back to beliefs here, right? You also, so in this section, obviously classroom climate is huge and expectations are one part of it. And you also talk a lot about belonging. And I think that's really important from day one. You have a whole book that I summarized as well, Belonging in School, that came out maybe 2 years ago. Belonging in School, creating a place where kids want to learn and the teachers want to stay. Great book. So, talk about this belonging piece. You have a couple of other effect sizes. Teacher-student relationships has an effect size of 62, classroom cohesion of 66, and then belonging itself has an effect size of 0.46. Have I been saying the points? Sorry, 0.66, 0.62, and 0.46. So any 1 or 2 ideas for building belonging as teachers start the year next year?
Yeah, so belonging, at 0.46, worth our time. It also affects well-being. And we've got studies that suicidal ideation drops when there's high levels of school belonging, depressive episodes. I mean, in addition to academics, there's a worthwhile thing about school belonging. I like Jeff Cohen's definition. It's a feeling that we're part of a larger group, values, respects, and cares for us, and to which we have something to contribute. That last part gets lost a lot. If I don't feel I can contribute to the group, I don't have a strong sense of belonging. It compromises my belonging. Eric Carter summarized 11 dimensions of belonging, needed, supported, those things. So I think there's actions we can take. And this is a super simple one. Let's start at the beginning of the year. We have good studies that greeting students at the door every single day increases their sense of belonging. And I hear people like, oh, I don't have time for that. If there was a middle school study, 10 schools, that after 2 weeks of grading every student every day, engagement, teacher reported, student engagement increased by 20 percentage points and discipline referrals dropped by 9 percentage points in 2 weeks. I don't know of another intervention that costs nothing that gets that kind of an outcome because students' sense of belonging, being known and recognized and valued went up. Classroom jobs. You're important here. You contribute to this classroom. I mean, there's things we can do that are kind of simple, and then there are more complex things about your identities and who you are and are you valued and celebrated when you're there. And I think belonging is malleable. Belonging changes day to day, can change day to day. There was a student perspective study on belonging, and they looked at, is it student-to-student relationships? Is it student-teacher relationships, or is it student-administrator relationships? Student-to-student have almost no correlation to belonging.
Isn't that crazy? That's crazy.
It's the adults.
Yeah, it's the adults.
And I'll paraphrase the great poet Taylor Swift, it's us, we're the problem. Or to turn her statement, it's us, we're the solution.
Yes.
It's the grown-ups who create that class cohesion, the belonging, the value that we are powerful in telling young people you're important here.
Wow. That's amazing to me, the 2 weeks. I'll add to that. I just did a podcast with Julie Costin and Kate McLeod, and they took the greeting students at the door up a level, and they said, not just greeting students by name, but saying, I'm so glad you came to class today.
Yep.
That's
a friendly
amazing.
gesture, a comment they made, all of that is super important.
And I think the way you're describing belonging, I do like that definition, and it has to do with contributing too, is that it's not just acceptance. Acceptance is sort of more passive, and
Right.
belonging is a more active feeling that I belong here. Acceptance is more in the like tolerance. Are the
Right.
kids tolerated, or do they feel accepted, or do they feel they belong? So I love your examples, and I hope people take it to heart. Maybe, read that book as well before starting the new school year. I want to touch on another signature practice 4, which is teaching students to drive their own learning. Lots of educators are burnt out. They would be thrilled to have
Right.
students drive more of their own learning. It has an effect size of 0.96. So again, over 2 years worth of learning. So what is it that teachers can do other than hope that the students drive their own learning?
Yeah, right. Again, as you said, hope's not a plan. That's an interesting one. So we like to say students drive their own learning but we're drawing on engagement research. We're drawing on self-regulation research. So I love the phrase students drive their own learning. But the reality is, are they learning to self-regulate? Are they learning to self-assess? Are they learning to monitor? Those are the skills that we're teaching. So in our work, on our thinking around this, if you don't know what you're learning and where you currently are in the learning journey, you can't drive your own learning. So what teachers need to do, are we clear about where the learning journey is? And as you said earlier, and I'll echo this, a significant percentage of minutes are spent on things students already know.
Yeah.
There's no need to drive your learning if you've already learned it. And good initial assessments help us. And I saw on TikTok, someone said, why are we wasting time making kids feel bad about what they don't already know? Well, that's a culture of the classroom. That's back to signature practice 1.
Yeah.
If we say, I'm going to pre-assess you, not graded, so that I know what I don't have to teach you because you've already learned it, students appreciate it. So first is, do I know where I'm learning? Do I know what I need to learn and where I'm at currently? Then, have I been provided sufficient learning strategies and choices to use those strategies? So let's take graphic organizers for a moment. There's lots of them. If the teacher says, today we're doing a Venn diagram, students will comply or not. Instead, here are tools to compare and contrast. Here are tools to show hierarchical relationships. Now, a month later into the school year, we're looking at comparing and contrasting. Choose a tool that works. That allows students the practice of making choices. Sometimes they will make a bad choice, and they will learn from that as well. So teaching tools and having students select tools. And then how do they monitor and self-assess? When you drive your learning, you have to know, are you making progress? Do I need to redouble my efforts? Did I get there? Am I celebrating my learning and I'm ready to teach someone else? All of those factors go into, am I willing to drive my learning? It relates to engagement and how we define engagement. It relates to attention and our ability to garner students' attention. And it relates to our ability to teach metacognition and self-regulation. So that's the research we pull in, but we put it together and came up with do students drive their own learning?
Yeah, no, I love that. It does combine so many different things. And it is, first of all, it's our responsibility as the teachers to teach students. There are some students who have some inherent motivation or tools, but we've got to teach students how. So what does it look like, right? It's not just accept my feedback, but if you don't understand it, ask what it means. Or if I just put an A on your paper, ask me for some actual feedback, or along the way, don't wait to turn it like what are the skills that we can teach? Zaretta Hammond talks about how we often unwittingly teach with a culture of compliance. And we may not realize it, but in that example you gave where you say to the students, okay, everybody use this Venn diagram to compare, the two ideas in this reading. We think, oh, I'm giving them a tool or I'm scaffolding, right? But really we haven't, when we're not there and they're doing a reading, if we don't tell them to do this Venn diagram, how are they going to know how to compare two ideas, right? Or what if for some students the Venn diagram isn't the ideal way and they would choose a different one? So there's a lot of practices to teach them, practice tests. I mean, I remember when I was in high school and I used to make myself practice tests. Nobody taught me that. But then when I became a teacher, I taught my students, how do you create a practice test and how can you create one that works for you? Um, so yeah, I think that is huge, teaching students to drive their own learning. Also, we're in the middle, we're not going to get into an AI talk right now, but the future is people learning how to learn, right? Whatever that future is, whether it's with AI, without, whatever jobs the students are going to have, they're going to have to learn how to learn, whatever it is. And if they have to learn how to learn, they've got to be the driver of that. It's not always going to be a manager, a boss, a supervisor saying, Doug, first do this, then do that, right? So I think that's very connected. All right, one last signature practice. 8, the power of the collective, that encompasses collective teacher efficacy, which is at the top of John Hattie's list for now, although I didn't know about those robust numbers, so I have to go look. You'll have to tell me if it has a high one. But collective teacher efficacy has a whooping effect size of 1.34, so more than 3 years. Students who have teachers who have a sense of teacher collective efficacy can learn in 3 years what other students who don't have those teachers can learn. And yeah, so that's amazing. I recently summarized, Jenny Donahue and Glenn Forbes' book Collective Impact, and I think it's really important. And it involves this signature practice involves efficacy, student efficacy, teacher efficacy, and self-efficacy as well as collective efficacy. So can you talk a little bit about this practice and what that means in the classroom?
Yeah, and I think it's super powerful because it's rare and hard to accomplish. Collective efficacy is difficult. Before he died, I had a chance to interview Bandura on this idea of how'd you come up with the collective part? And I understand self-efficacy, putting forth effort, am I reinforced? But attributing it to the group, not just the individual, it's both, was a really important breakthrough of when we are part of a group and we have a goal and we work towards that goal and we have evidence that we're making progress and we can attribute that evidence to our collective efforts, not one person, not social loafing, we become a powerful group. And the way I think about it is collective efficacy is collective responsibility in action. And going way back to Shirley Hord, early days of PLC, Shirley Hord was talking about breaking out the silo and isolation of having to be responsible for every kid's learning. That could be overwhelming. And she gave very simple examples of grade level regrouping, all kinds of things like this. They're I know your students, I'm offering you assistance. I'm offering to take your 2 most struggling readers, here 10 that are doing really well, and being flexible in some parts of the day. And just gave an example of collective responsibility. Fast forward to the education research, especially leadership research on collective efficacy. Do we attribute the growth, the progress, the learning to our collective effort, or is it still your students versus my students? Because if it's your students, my students, we're having a conversation. We might be cooperating, but we haven't got to the point of collective efficacy. And going back, I really believe you can't have collective efficacy if you don't have collective responsibility. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of the collective efficacy books out there. Do we, at our core, believe we are responsible for 4th graders learning? Or do we believe you take yours, I take mine, we come together, we analyze data, and then we never realize the learning outcomes promised by collective efficacy?
And go ahead.
I would say one more thing. Beyond collective efficacy is a phrase that I was only introduced to last year, collective effervescence. Emil Durkheim, 1912, sociologist, who said there are some times where you get joy and harmony out of being in the collective. So if I were doing that over, collective efficacy is super important to me, but I want teachers and teacher teams to experience joy from the work they do with their colleagues. So yes, I want you to have collective responsibility. And yes, I want you to know that the outcomes you're getting are because you are collective and you're collectively having the impact. And I would like you to have harmony, shared purpose, and joy. So I'm even thinking further, and back to Emil Durkheim's work, we can elevate the collective efficacy even further, not just going through the motions, not just saying, yeah, we're powerful, we're rah, 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 we're great. And yes, we have some evidence that we do great work, but saying to each other, this is amazing. We should be celebrating our successes. What a joy to work with you. I am so proud of my colleagues. I love working with you all.
Yeah.
So that's where I want to get to.
Yeah. No, I love that. I hadn't heard. And if you need to go grab water, go ahead. Collective effervescence. I haven't heard that. It seems to incorporate some elements perhaps of flow.
Yes, I think so too.
But and again, this sounds like something woo-woo, like, oh, let's hope that our faculty or my 7th grade team has collective teacher efficacy. No, it can be built. And from the leaders' role in modeling, right? Do you celebrate the success of individuals, or do you success? Do you celebrate teams, right? Do you have your teachers working in silos, and there's a section on PLCs in this, do you have them work in PLCs or teams? And when they do work in teams, are they working as a group, or are they working as a collaborative team where they have an interdependent goal, which is something Rick Dufour pointed out initially, I believe, from him, that it's not just a goal like you do this, Doug, in your class, and I'm do this, but as a team, a math department, a 7th grade team, what is our interdependent goal? And if from the top, leaders can ask for that, and that's their expectation, that does help people work together. So there are structures to put in place to build this collective teacher efficacy, and ways to model it. And I like that you said, even if you're just a member, even if you're a member of a 7th grade team, it doesn't have to come from on high. You can say, let's build this together. And that goes back to the school culture, the classroom culture, right? If you walk through the halls and it's not, you look up and you greet every student, not just your own students, but that belief together. And I don't know, call me crazy, I don't know your politics or anything, Doug, but I'm just feeling like in this time, people are feeling the need to come together as humans and see that they can have an impact. So it seems to me that in addition to collective teacher efficacy having the highest effect size, it also seems like a perfect thing to work on now. And if you were a leader to pick a theme for next year, collective teacher efficacy would be a great one. And you could read this chapter from the book.
I'll add, so I mean, as you were talking, something I don't talk about a lot, but kind of on my mind, probably will end up in some writing upcoming. I think teachers assess learning. And we have tools and skills and processes, but and leaders, we help teachers assess learning, make instructional decisions. But I think leaders have to monitor learning. And I think it's a different mindset. So I ask leaders, how do you monitor learning in your building or in your system? One of the ways you can monitor learning is being a participant in a PLC conversation, because teachers talk about their perceptions of students' learning. Here's the evidence of our learning. And when you're listening, if you're listening and hearing, my students scored this, how did your students score? They're talking about learning on an individual level, not a collective level. But they're talking about learning. And how are they monitoring based on their assessments? And then as a leader, when you're hearing that and you're monitoring learning, not monitoring teaching, when you visit a classroom, how do you monitor the teaching versus monitoring the learning? Because when we go to classrooms, we monitor teaching. Now, we do need to watch teaching, we need to coach teaching, we need to give feedback, but are we also monitoring learning? And so I think I've been pushing this conversation about what are the tools we have to monitor the learning that is occurring. I can't collect 650 exit slips today times 4 or 5 classes a day and check in on learning. It's not possible. I would run out of time. So what do I have as a school leader to monitor learning that's occurring in this building? Daily, weekly, quarterly, etc. That's an important job description that I don't think have fully explored. We talk about creating a learning environment, which is also important, the climate and culture. But how do I build a system of monitoring learning? And I think watching and participating in the collectives at our school helps me monitor learning.
And it builds the we, right? It's not like I am the principal and this is the 4th grade team, right? It builds the we as well. but I like that focus on the monitoring learning. All right, I want to be respectful of your time and just leave with a few takeaways, if it's possible, because the book is deceptively simple because of the pictures. There's a lot in there. There's a lot in this book. So one takeaway or main idea of the book, one step or action where to start with all these jam-packed ideas in the book, and one other resource on the topic of visible learning for people.
I think if you did a review of table of contents and said, where are we strong? What's our strength? Like, is teacher clarity a strength? Is collaborative learning communities a strength? What is your strength? And then you'd say, based on that, where's a logical next place to go? We do argue climate and culture, school climate and classroom climate is the prerequisite. Climate first, learning second. It's hard to get kids to learn if the climate's not healthy. After that, I think it's more of an inventory. And I don't think there's a wrong place to start in this. I think that there's many places to start to support teachers on that journey of improving the implementation of evidence in their classrooms and schools.
And do you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but when you have people pick a place to start, do you suggest they, collaboratively read a chapter and focus on that at a time? Yeah. Okay.
And you might pace it out. Every 3 weeks, we're going to add a new concept, or you know what, we don't have time, we're going to skip it for this time. It's not, I mean, and I like your language. It's deceptively simple. It's illustrated. There's beautiful illustrations, but the concepts in there are deep, and the implementation of those are even deeper.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yes. Another resource on the topic of visible learning, if people want to learn more, not that they're going to get through this deceptively simple book so quickly.
There is a book on teaching students to drive their learning that we did with John Hattie and Sarah Ortega and Nancy and I. It's an interesting one. It's more of a playbook. So you work through the concepts and you write in it to help you think about your ideas, self-assessments and things like that, student tools, etc. So that's one that's kind of on my mind. I probably would go with that one. I mean, I think that the drive learning is a deep dive.
Less is more. Let's do that. Great. And for people to learn more about your work, do you suggest they go to fisherandfrey.com or somewhere else? Or
Sure. Or LinkedIn, Douglas Fisher on LinkedIn. I have increased my presence on LinkedIn. I'm super happy with that. I put stuff out all the time. We did a chunking article. It's up right now. It just came out. So that might be interesting to people. Who knows? By the time you listen to us or watch us, who knows what else will be on LinkedIn. But LinkedIn's kind of become my go-to professional resource sharing platform now.
Great. Oh, good. I will put that in the show notes then. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, Doug. I really am in awe of your work.
Thank you.
You almost don't write something that I don't want to summarize, but I have to give airtime to other people. So thank you.
I appreciate that.
And thanks to those listening as well. I know how busy you are, so thanks for taking this time. If you learned something from Doug, and I'm sure you did, I hope you'll share this with other people. I will be back in 2 weeks. Until then, learn more, lead better.
Thank you.
Thank you.